So we will move on, resuming debate. Reprise de débat. The honourable member for York South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to rise today to speak on Bill C-31. It's under time allocation, so not many members of my party will be able to speak on this bill, and I'm very pleased to be able to. This huge omnibus bill, which, according to the member from Palliser, is very easy to read, does call into question some person's ability to have basic math skills, because basic math skills are some of what is necessary to actually follow the money. And some of the money that is announced in this budget bill and is announced in government's budgets is money that's old money, that was here before. And I need to remind members that I'll be splitting my time with the member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you very much. And so, like the current Ontario Conservative leader, math is not the Conservative strong suit. One of the things about this bill is something called FATCA. And FATCA is a U.S. legislation that we are now imposing on Canadians. And that U.S. legislation applies to Canadian citizens, according to this government, who happened to be considered American citizens by the U.S. government. And the legislation that is before us requires Canadian banks to disclose personal, private information to the U.S. government through Canada Revenue Agency at some unknown cost, because, again, being math challenged, the Conservatives haven't figured out just how much this is going to cost us. The banks estimate it would have cost them $100 million per bank to actually implement FATCA, and now it's being passed on to CRA. CRA will then have to cost that out themselves, and it'll be taxpayers ultimately paying that cost. But that's not the worst part of this. This legislation actually gives the American government, through our own government, personal, private information of Canadian citizens. That is something that we are now discovering has happened through CPIC database, with personal medical information being shared with the U.S. government to stop people at the border, to prevent them traveling. Do we really want to be helping another government to tax Canadian citizens, people born here who've never been to the United States in their lives? And maybe the members opposite don't understand what the U.S. government has decided. And the U.S. government has decided that some individuals who were born in Canada and have never lived in the United States are now U.S. citizens. Those people are U.S. citizens because their parents happen to be U.S. citizens. So it's the parents of children who cause the children to be deemed to be dual citizens by the U.S. and therefore caught by FATCA. They're dual in Canada, but they're U.S. citizens under the U.S. law. Let me tell you about a woman in Calgary whose son is caught in this dilemma. He is disabled. He has filed his U.S. taxes. His mother filed them for him. And it costs his mother thousands of dollars because our government has not negotiated a tax treaty with the U.S. that allows the individuals in Canada to be treated the same under the law in Canada as they are in the U.S. If the members opposite would stop shouting, I could actually explain this to you, Mr. Speaker. Those individuals who have disability tax credits in Canada are not allowed that exemption in the U.S. So they have to pay taxes in the U.S., thousands of dollars of taxes. And he cannot renounce his citizenship because the U.S. government will not let him. And there is laughter across the way, Mr. Speaker, because they don't understand this situation. The individual is mentally challenged, and the U.S. government will not allow him to withdraw his U.S. citizenship.
Order. There's just way too much noise in the chamber. If the member is having difficulty listening, I suggest the member step out of the chamber. Otherwise, I would ask everybody to maintain a reasonable level of decorum. I'm having difficulty hearing the member from York South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this particular situation, the individual in question's parents have renounced their American citizenship. They no longer have to file U.S. taxes. But the U.S. government refuses to accept their son's renunciation because they have to do it on his behalf, because he is disabled. He is mentally disabled. And the U.S. government has decided that he doesn't know what he's doing, and therefore they will not accept it. So they must still file taxes on his behalf and pay U.S. taxes, because our tax treaty with the U.S. doesn't cover the disability tax credit. So there's no benefit to this individual to have a disability tax credit, because he's got to pay the money back to the U.S. And in addition, because he was never in the United States in his life. He was born in Canada. His parents happened to be Canadian citizens as well, but they were born in the United States. And the U.S. government has decided that these children now are captured by FATCA. So this individual will have his personal tax information, his personal banking information, the contents of his bank accounts reported to the U.S. for the purposes of their tax compliance, not ours. Now, that's a horrible example of what's going to happen as a result of this bill. That's a horrible example of the way this government has negotiated deals with the U.S. First, it's off with lumber deal. They haven't managed to update the tax treaty, and now they've got this FATCA deal that will just allow the U.S. government access to tons more personal information of about 1 million Canadians, some of whom were born here and have never lived in the U.S., but the U.S. government considers them U.S. citizens. U.S. persons, I think, is their terminology. And so perhaps the Conservative opposite don't understand all of the implications. Perhaps they think it's a big joke. But it's not a joke to that individual or to his parents, who are trying to comply with the law and discover just how expensive that is, in addition to the thousands of dollars they have to pay to accountants to actually figure out the U.S. tax obligations. In addition, Mr. Speaker, there were a number of promises made in 2 budgets, both 2013 and 2014, that we still haven't seen. Seniors in my riding who don't have internet access are still paying $2.26 a month, and in some cases $3.39 a month, in order to pay their bill by getting a bill in the mail. As I recall, there was considerable hoopla by this government about how they were going to end that practice. Well, it hasn't ended. It's not in this budget. It wasn't in the previous budget. It's not in this budget implementation bill. It was in the budget statement, but it's not in the implementation bill. So seniors in my riding and others who have to get their bills by mail, my riding is a riding of individuals that don't have a lot of money in the first place. They don't have enough money in many cases to be able to afford internet, so they have to get their bill in the mail. And they get their bill in the mail and they have to pay an extra $2.26. And I say 26 cents because that's how much tax is paid on that extra bill that those individuals get for wanting to get their bill in the mail. And this government has done nothing about that. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance in the 2013 budget suggested that the government would be implementing legislation that if they were spending federally infrastructure money on infrastructure in this country, that apprenticeships would be part of that spend. That hasn't happened. And one of the most difficult things that we haven't been able to sort out is we have a skills shortage in this country, according to the Minister of Opposite, who deals with this kind of thing, and we can't train people because we can't get apprenticeships for them. We can't get apprenticeships because we're spending money and having to hire temporary foreign workers. It's a crazy system. And the minister actually, the finance minister, got it. He suggested the solution, but nothing's been done. And I'm being given the wrap it up sign, Mr. Speaker, so thank you very much.
Questions and comments? Questioning commentaire. The honourable member for Tobique-Matiquac. Another 6 years, I may get a voice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for his comments. And when I gave my comments before, I said one of the unfortunate things about the FATCA part of it is people are confusing the need to file a tax return in the U.S. with the requirement that we are under FATCA. The situation that he raised, as troubling as that is, doesn't change with FATCA, because that's a tax compliance issue that that individual and his family have. With FATCA, if you look through, assuming you start with $1 million, as I went through the numbers here a while ago, Mr. Speaker, every account less than $50,000, non-reportable. All the registered accounts, non-reportable. Between $50,000 and $1 million, there's an electronic scan. If there's no U.S. indicia, which most people have never given on their bank account that there's any U.S. indicia, whether it be an address or taxpayer identification number, guess what? Non-reportable. So the only thing you get into a real challenge is over $1 million, where there has to be a manual check. So I'm just encouraging the member to just clarify the comments that there is a difference between the tax compliance and filing of this issue and the FATCA, but more importantly, the intergovernmental agreement that we signed to protect Canadians.
The honourable member for York South Weston.
Well, it doesn't protect Canadians' personal private information, Mr. Speaker, and that's part of what we're talking about here. But maybe, and I'm sure there are many Canadians out there who don't understand what a U.S. indicia is. I don't think it's defined anywhere in the budget document as what exactly is a U.S. indicia. And the whole point of my comments was that there are a number of problems between this government and the U.S. government with regard to tax compliance. FATCA makes it worse, Mr. Speaker. FATCA actually distributes a whole lot of information that the U.S. isn't entitled to have to the U.S.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for Saanich-Calfans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable colleague is absolutely right. The terms around FATCA are not defined. The intergovernmental agreement, the so-called IGA between the U.S. and Canada, Mr. Speaker, has not been ratified as a treaty by the United States. We're treating it as though we have treaty obligations. The U.S. hasn't ratified it. We've been warned by the leading lawyers in this country, including Professor Peter Hogg, our leading constitutional expert, that this FATCA will violate Section 3 of the Charter. We've been warned by Professor Christians, who's the Stikeman Chair at McGill, that this FATCA does not need to be implemented to protect our banks from U.S. retaliation, that the U.S. does not have an automatic legal right to pursue sanctions against the banks based on something that is as outrageous as extraterritorial application of U.S. law, treating Canadian citizens now in two classes, those who have some contact with the United States and those who never did. And I ask my honourable colleague if he'll agree with me that we'll see this FATCA before the Supreme Court of Canada, where once again one of this current administration's laws will go down to defeat.
The honourable member for York South Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, this is yet another bill that is likely to find its way to the Supreme Court at some point and be ruled ineffective, and be ruled that it is not possible to have this bill, particularly the FATCA portion of it. And that is something that we face apparently almost on a daily basis, where this government brings forward laws that are in violation of Canada's Charter, of Canada's Constitution, and in fact of other laws that this government supposedly wants to uphold, like privacy laws, Mr. Speaker. And we just cannot continue this way. We cannot be bringing forward laws that are not in compliance with the other laws of this country.